This story took place one winter during my final year on patrol in the Arctic Ocean. There were around 60 of us on that ship that night, mostly military personnel. A cold wind blew in as the sun sank beneath the horizon. It illuminated one side of our ship for some time until at last, it was completely gone. The night air was frigid, so I was grateful to be inside. Faint chatter could be heard from above in the bridge, but I mostly ignored it. My quarters were down below. I was thankful to have one small porthole window on the side of my room, but that was about it. My room wasn't the most decorated, but it was comfortable. I had my old laptop sitting on the wooden desk. The carpet was a moldy green color, and a springy but somewhat comfortable bed. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly time for my shift. I sighed and groggily climbed the steel ladder onto the bridge. "Captain Grant," I said with a salute. "A fine night, isn't it?" he replied. "Cold, sir." "Yes, I suppose it is," he said with a chuckle, extinguishing his cigarette into a nearby ashtray. "I think I'm going to be heading off for now. It's been a long day. We should be at the harbor in a few days." "I like the sound of that," I said with a smile. To be quite honest, I was tired of being out at sea and longing for home, though I'm sure everyone was. A few of the staff remained on the lower decks, but I sat on the bridge staring at my watch. Time seemed to move slower whenever I did that, and so I tried to avoid it. The entire ocean was dark, aside from the dim lights on the ship, and there didn't appear to be a moon out, only a starlit sky. "Everyone has to do it, I suppose," said Officer Edward, who was approaching from behind. "Watch duty, I mean. Grant is getting too old for this. Is this your first time?" "Yeah," I managed to stifle out. Well, I remember mine as well. You'll be fine so long as you ignore anything you might see or hear from outside the ship." "What?" I chuckled. "We're in the middle of the ocean." "Must have just been the new recruits stirring drama then. I've heard reports lately of strange sights and sounds, maybe even seen them myself. Let's just be grateful we're going back to port in 2 days, assuming we are making full speed." "Wouldn't that be nice?" I must say An extremely loud boom interrupted my voice. Sweat dripped down my face as I felt my heart thump rapidly. What the hell was that? Officer Edward's face went paler than a ghost as he ran out of the bridge. I don't know. Wake the captain now," he shouted, turning around quickly. The officers who were awake below were stirring, along with the recruits. I ran down the hall through the back of the bridge to find the captain was already awake. "Captain, sir," I began to say, but he just walked past me, giving me no more than an estranged glance. His eyes appeared glazed over, and he walked silently. Edward had no success reaching him either. Eventually, the captain just walked down the stairs into the bowels of the ship. I ran over to Edward as fast as I could. A few other crew members were standing there. "What's the damage?" I'm not sure. This has never happened before. You don't think we're going down, do you?" "I hope not. Nobody is around for hundreds of miles." "Peterson has already sent out a signal." "Good." "Sir, the ammunition supply has exploded. D-deck is ablaze," a private shouted towards us. "Come, it's too hectic up here," said Edward, leading me down below. We arrived at the lounge to find it empty. "Cards?" he said. I nodded. At least it would be a nice distraction. "I trust the captain will handle this." "Are you kidding? He seems dazed." As I said, "Grant's too old for this." "Well, I suspect the damage isn't too serious. We are already heading back." "Listen to me." Edward eyed me closely. "Whatever you do, don't go into the water. Not only is it below freezing, but there's also... Also what?" "Just don't. I can't even explain it. But we've lost people in these waters before." I felt my heart begin thumping again. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said with a chuckle. "A repair boat will fix us up in a few hours and we'll be back home. I swear, this year I'm gonna quit the service. I haven't seen my wife in months." "Tell me about it. I just want to go back home. The service isn't for me. At least not here. We are in a time of peace anyway, so not sure why they need to be all the way up in this freezing waste." "It's nothing. Been out here for a few years and you know everything. I've been around the block many times. Seldom do recruits ever stay here. And from what you're telling me, you're no different. Don't be alarmed though. We've had fires before." He began to chuckle raspily when he stopped and his face went white again. He glanced down. I glanced down. There was a thin layer of water seeping in from the door. The lights flickered to the point where I thought that they would go out. Miraculously, they lit back up again. The entire hallway was covered in about a foot of water. "Damn it," Edward sputtered. "You stay here. I'll go find Peterson." And before I could argue, he was already down the hall. The water grew higher. I felt a sense of dread as I gazed down the hall. What if he doesn't return in time? After waiting for a few minutes, I eventually returned to the bridge. At least there it was dry. Though the slow panic returned as I watched the steel bow slowly dip closer and closer down into the water. Eventually, the cold seawater began flowing over the sides, pulling our cruiser deeper down into the water. A few of the officers fired flare guns, and they lit the sky up for a brief moment and released a thunderous boom. Yet there was no reply. I glanced back down the hall, looking for any sign of Edward. I still saw nothing. C deck had to have completely flooded by then, so I figured he was somewhere else. When Captain Grant came walking back up onto the bridge, I quickly left. His eyes were still glazed over, and he didn't appear to even notice me. His face was pale, and all he had was a gaping look of horror strewn across his face. The bow had completely gone under, and I could feel us going down quicker than before. The only sound aside from the screams and splashes of water was the sound of the steel ship creaking and roaring. The captain must have turned on his radio because old-timey music began to play from the bridge. Eventually, the water began pouring over the sides of the top deck and into the bridge. My heart beat faster and faster as I saw the water creep closer and closer. Most of the crew were now swimming and screaming. A lot of the recruits were there as well, trying to find anything to float on. The stern was sinking from behind as well. A few steel beams tore open, sucking whoever was unfortunate enough to be swimming above down into the bows of the ship, never to see the light of day again. A few crew members were wrestling with one of the inflatable rafts. A lot of them had sunk, but this one had finally been able to get open. Officer Bragg and a few recruits were sitting on it as well. We all began rowing away as the last of the steel cruiser disappeared beneath the waters, taking everyone still aboard down with it. I felt myself being pulled down by the cruiser. I wrestled with the current until finally, I found myself gasping on the surface, surrounded by a few dozen other people all doing the same. Everyone was swimming towards that one raft, but they were rowing away. I swam over to it, fortunate to be the closest. "He'll drown us!" one of the men aboard shouted. The water was so cold that I could hardly speak, but I think I managed to let out a gaping plea. The next thing I knew, Officer Bragg was pulling me overboard. I was worried that the others would swamp us, but they were still far away. Just before the lights went out on the soon-to-disappear ship, I could have sworn that I saw Edward standing in the window of one of the portholes, smiling at me. The ship was completely submerged, but I could still see it briefly. He was gone completely when the power cut. That's not possible, I thought to myself. "Row!" shouted Officer Bragg from behind. There were still a bunch of people treading in the water. That was until it started. With the ocean pitch black, it was impossible to see much. But I did see some unseen force pulling the people down. Was it the suction of the ship or something more? That I cannot say. It only took a few more minutes before the shouting had ceased and the ocean was eerily calm. Nobody was moving or speaking anymore, and Officer Bragg ordered everyone to shut their mouths. I spent the next few hours in the worst terror I could have imagined, unable to sleep at all. When the first light of dawn arose, I knew we had made it through the night. I carefully peered down into the water for a glance at anything, but I saw nothing other than inky black shapes swimming in the dark depths below. I didn't dare allow my mind to wander on what they were. I glanced around the boat. We were alone in the middle of the ocean. One orange raft, aside from a few distant icebergs. There wasn't a trace of anyone in the water. Not a single person or piece of drifting material, aside from a raft. Officer Bragg held his revolver all night and still clutched it the following morning. He finally loosened his grip when we all heard the sound of a helicopter in the distance. We all cried tears of relief until we felt the raft begin to be pulled down by the same unseen force. Bragg's face immediately went from relief to fear. He grabbed his revolver and began shooting into the water. The helicopter's ladder had hit the raft, which was now filling with water. A few men had already begun climbing it, while Bragg aimed his revolver down at the water. "Bastards," he shouted. I climbed onto the ladder and began ascending. Bragg was the last one onto the ladder. The entire raft sank just as he jumped off. We couldn't climb faster. They began rolling the ladder back up. I glanced down to see a long, gnarled black arm reach up out of the water. The skin almost looked burnt, with long nails. It came within an inch of Bragg's foot, before he blew it open with his revolver. The hand quickly went back down into the water. I couldn't see what it was attached to, nor did I want to. None of us felt safe until the helicopter landed onto a carrier. Within a few days, we were able to make it back to shore. I left the service soon after and decided to return home. Nobody ever found the wreckage of our cruiser, nor was anyone ever recovered. But I do know that they no longer send patrols in that one stretch of land anymore, and for good reason. I now live landlocked, And I hate the sight of water that I can't see the bottom of, even lakes. Beware what lies beneath the depths unseen.